We're not playing. F around and find out. That's what we're going to do. If any of you are on your little Slack communications back and forth saying, won't this be fun? You can have your fun in a jail cell, because that's what's coming.
Now, the efforts to combat Donald Trump's lies and the violence that they may put into motion, people in charge of ensuring a fair election and a peaceful transfer of power in America, is something we've focused on for 4 years now, and it's where we start today. With voting rights attorney, founder of the site Democracy Docket, Mark Elias. His firm has been retained by the Harris campaign ahead of the election. And with me at the table, law professor at Hofstra University, former attorney at the Brennan Center for Justice's Democracy Program, James Sample is back. Mark Elias, I start with you. I first saw the F around, and I love that we are talking about enforcing our laws, because there are laws against voter fraud. It's already a crime. So the voter suppression laws were passed in the absence of both fraud and a lack of laws to enforce voter fraud. But I find it ominous that the chatter is such that we need to platform the message that the laws will be enforced on Election Day. What are you seeing and hearing?
So, look, let me start with some good news. You know, tens of millions of Americans have already voted. They have gone to the polls in early voting states. They have gotten their mail-in ballots and they have returned them if they want to vote by mail. And tomorrow, that concludes with in-person voting on Election Day. Now, that won't be the end of the vote counting process, and people are going to need to have a little bit of patience around that. But, you know, democracy is working. Now, it is not because Donald Trump wants it to work. It is not because the Republican Party is doing anything but trying to throw sand in its gears, but it is working because in our system of elections, which relies on tens of thousands of election workers around the country, they are doing their job. And voters are voting. So I want to always be realistic about Donald Trump. He will lie, as you said. He lies about everything, and he will lie about the outcome of the 2024 election, just like he lied about the outcome of the 2020 election. But just like in 2020, his lies were met in court, and they lost, and they will be met again in the court of public opinion and in court if necessary, and they will lose again.
James, let me show you something that Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro said. He was the Attorney General 4 years ago.
Well, let's be clear. In 2020, we had a free and fair, safe and secure election. I was the Attorney General back then. Donald Trump and his allies took me to court 43 different times. They went 0-43. I went 43-0, and we had a free and fair, safe and secure election. And the lawyers who Donald Trump sent to court to lie on his behalf, folks like Rudy Giuliani, lost their law licenses because they lied in our courts. Donald Trump was in Pennsylvania today lying about our elections. We will once again have a free and fair, safe and secure election, and the will of the people will be respected and protected.
I forgot that it was 43 cases in Pennsylvania alone. What is the scale that we should anticipate this time?
Well, it was 43 cases in Pennsylvania alone, but it was also 60-plus cases around the country, Mark's firm litigating many of those. And across the board, Donald Trump lost. And the reason he kept losing is that it's one thing to make a claim in a press conference. It's one thing to make a claim while your hair dye is dripping down your forehead at Four Seasons Landscaping. It's another thing in court. And the reality of court, where evidence matters, where facts require actual evidence, is that Donald Trump has lost again and again in election contexts and has lost again and again in other contexts, be they civil. So whether it's a jury of 9 individuals unanimously finding him guilty of sexual abuse or liable for sexual abuse in a civil case, or whether it's 12 jurors finding him guilty of 34 counts, felony counts in a criminal context, whether it's a judge in the context of a New York civil fraud case, when facts matter, when there is actual evidence, when Mark's team does what Mark's team does so well, Donald Trump loses. So there's no question whatsoever. Tomorrow night, at some point, you can take it to the bank. Donald Trump will claim that he won. Now, it's very possible that at some point down the road, he may end up being the victor in this election. But you know this, he will not have won when he claims that he did.
It's such an important sort of viewer's guide to tomorrow night. I want to ask you, Mark Elias, about this comment from Colorado Secretary of State Janet Griswold. Let me play it first.
Election officials, or I'll just speak for myself, feel like we're alone. The DOJ has only pursued less than 20 cases of threats against election officials since 2020. More needs to be done nationally and federally. We need more support. And frankly, we've been sounding the alarms for 4 years. Where is it at?
The history is yet to be written about the Garland Department of Justice in the time of this threat to democracy. But here's one of the questions I have, right, that we'll know from the voters. The voters will tell us. Is there a part of the electorate that feels an added burden to, after reading all the facts of Donald Trump's role in the deadly insurrection as laid out by the bipartisan January 6th Select Committee, as reading, if they have sort of taken in the Jack Smith indictments, that Donald Trump has been charged with crimes as serious and as unpatriotic as any politician in history, let alone ex-president. And there has been no adjudication of those alleged crimes. They were stymied in the Supreme Court. Do you think there's, and it feels to me like there's something there's an agency, right, in this being, it's a twist of fate. If Merrick Garland had acted faster, if the Supreme Court hadn't gummed it up, maybe it would have seen its way through the court of law. And I'm not tilting at windmills here and trying to find a shiny silver lining, which many people in my life accuse me of doing. But I wonder if there's something that makes voters realize, you know what? I would have been held to a different standard, but as a voter, I'm going to go out and vote for someone who I think is unfit. Do you pick any of that up in the electorate and the enthusiasm that you see reported?
I do. I mean, I think that we need to be clear-eyed about a few things. The first is that Donald Trump has been not just indicted, but in New York, he's been convicted and is awaiting sentencing. And, you know, the judicial process in many respects moved too slow and too cautiously around Donald Trump and his crimes after the Senate Republicans refused to convict in impeachment by moving too slow and too cautiously, or maybe more politically than they should have. And so here we are the day before the election. And I think the message that voters have is clear. It's up to us. You know, it's not going to be up to the courts. It's not going to be up to the Department of Justice. It's not going to be up to the Republicans in Congress doing the right thing. They're not going to do the right thing. It is finally up to the voters. And tomorrow, when the polls open, voters will have a chance to do something that we have been waiting for, which is to finally render a verdict on Donald Trump and to make clear that he is not an acceptable option to ever serve in the U.S. government again. And so I hope everyone does that. If you've not already voted, make a plan to vote. Make sure you know where your polling place is. And tomorrow, go vote, because democracy depends on it.
I double-checked my location because it's been 4 years and it was COVID, and I did just that today. I want to ask you about the Supreme Court. I mean, for years, Republican campaigns relied on voters also rendering judgments about things they wanted from the Supreme Court. This time, the Supreme Court has rendered Donald Trump above the law, in the words of other justices, as essentially a king. What is your message to people who are thinking about that?
The acronym DEI has gotten a lot of attention in recent years, especially in the last couple of years. But I think of DEI when I think of the Supreme Court in a very different way. I think of the Dobbs decision, which is clearly a major, maybe the major focal point for many voters in this election. I think of ethics scandal after ethics scandal. No enforcement mechanism whatsoever, hypocrisy at the highest level, the highest court of the land. You couldn't do, as a member of Congress, where you're one of 435 in the House, you couldn't do what the Supreme Court justices, who are one of 9, are doing. And they, unlike our constituent branches, the judiciary has the responsibility to the rule of law, the responsibility to due process. So D, Dobbs, E, ethics, and I, the immunity ruling. An immunity ruling, whether it's Judge Michael Luttig or any of the other conservatives, that is so far beyond the pale of what had been acceptable American jurisprudence. You know, Richard Nixon would have given anything for that ruling. Why does Gerald Ford pardon him? Why does Mitch McConnell say on the floor of the Senate, well, we have a criminal justice process that can deal with these situations, and that's his justification for not impeaching? So as Mark said, too slowly and too quickly, right? The Senate Republicans refused to convict, or at least some of them, most of them refused to convict. That put us in the situation where it was up to the judicial process. And then the Supreme Court steps in and says, no, 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 the judicial process applies to all but one. I think DEI, Dobbs, ethics, and immunity should be on the minds of voters as they consider whether or not, for example, if Donald Trump wins, make no mistake, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito are likely to be replaced with 40-year-old versions of themselves. If that's what you want the Dobbs decision for the rest of most of our lives.
It's unbelievable, ominous sort of final thought, and that's why you're both here. Mark Elias, tell me how you see the state of the lawsuits that you're most sort of prepared for and primed for starting tomorrow night.
Yeah, so first of all, this has been the most litigated election already in American history, and we have not yet even gotten to Election Day, which is actually really extraordinary. Democracy Docket put out today its final report before